Hey, welcome to Let It Be. I'm Vanessa, and this is my little corner of music YouTube. So today I'm going to do another episode of my series I call Should It Stay or Should It Go, where I look at albums in my collection and I reassess whether or not I need to continue to own them. Sometimes these are albums that I have never listened to, just been sitting on the shelf, or some that I've checked out in the past and just was not feeling that much or really that into, but still never got rid of anyway. This is just a more mindful approach of looking at what I have and making sure that my collection is exactly as I want it to be and filled with albums that I really truly want. For a long time, I know that many people can relate to this. You just keep collecting and acquiring things for quantity and not necessarily quality. And as I've gotten older, have just decided that that is not the approach. I have limited space. I just want to love everything, or at least like it a lot. Today, it's a bit of a different a collection that I'm going to look at. It's not just one album, it's actually five, but it is a one set. So this is the original album series collection of the first five albums by Aha, the Norwegian pop group that much more famous outside of North America. And I always knew that. I had originally picked this up because I was interested in their first album, Hunting High and Low. I love Take on Me. Who doesn't? And I liked a lot of the other hits from that. I liked the title track and I liked The Sun Always Shines on TV. And I'd read some good things about the album, so I was going to pick it up for myself a few years back. And when I looked, this collection with the first five albums was actually, I don't know if it was cheaper or it was more cost effective. I just decided to go with that, even though I'd never heard anything else from any of the other albums. I had read some good things, I think, about the second album, Scoundrel Days, but other than that, I really didn't know anything. And I continued to know nothing. I just never took this out and listened to the whole thing. I had listened to Hunting High and Low, but I don't think I'd heard still anything off of the other four albums. So I decided it was time to just take a closer look. So I'm going to start and go through quickly through each album. I don't want to get too in depth and bog this down, but I will give a quick review of each one. So starting chronologically, of course, with Hunting High and Low. I always like how these collections have everything in these little sleeves, almost like mini records. It's kind of cute. So, of course, Take on Me is a classic and a great way to open the album. And then Train of Thought keeps the energy going. And I don't think there's really any point where this album takes any kind of downturn. The first half of the album is especially strong, but there was a lot to love in the second half as well. There's memorable melodies throughout, the songs are engaging, and Morten Harket is a fantastic vocalist. And this is a theme that I continue to see throughout these five albums. There's a good balance of upbeat pop songs and more introspective songs. It's a bit surprising to me that they weren't more successful in North America after hearing this album. It's very solid, especially for this type of album at the time. There have been a lot of synth pop albums of this era that I've heard that have had a very strong division in quality between the singles and the rest of the album, but that's definitely not the case here. I think they crafted a very solid album front to back. And of course, not every song is a potential single, but I think they serve the album well. They're still good songs. So I've long heard positive things about this album, and it really doesn't disappoint. It's 4 stars for me. I think it is very good. So then that leads, what about the rest of them? So next is their second album, Scoundrel Days, from 1986. Um, this is where I go in and I have absolutely no knowledge about anything on the album. And the title track opens the album, and Morten reminds me a bit of Midge here, which is always a positive for me. I love his voice. I can hear a bit more of the Roxy music influence on this album, at least in the first couple songs. The sound of this album is more muscular than the previous one, a bit more evolved from the straight synth pop of that album, and it has a more sophisticated adult feel. And I think Morten shows off his vocal range even more on this album. On the second side, there's a bit more of that synth pop sound, especially in songs like Cry Wolf and The Weight of the World. They have great anthemic choruses with Morten's powerhouse vocals in full force. The strong focus on melody and their songwriting is still very present on this album, with a bit more of an evolved sound from straight ahead synth pop, and that is very satisfying to hear. The nice thing about this album is that it doesn't feel cheesy, which is often the problem that I have with this part of the 80s, especially as synth pop evolves into more mainstream. Well, it's always pretty mainstream, but I just find somewhere around the mid 80s into the late 80s, there tends to become this cheesier sound that is harder to grab onto for me. But I do think that this album is very 80s. It could not have been made at any other time, but it's not a negative. It doesn't detract from it. So it is another 4-star album. It is also very good and a nice surprise. So then things start to go a bit of a different direction with their second album, Stay on These Roads from 1988, a time period where things get a little more dicey for me, as I said before, especially with like more mainstream sounding pop. It's very noticeable 80s drums on the first song. And I don't know that it's a negative, but it's definitely something you can't ignore. And the vocals are on point as usual, of course, but it leans a lot more into a late 80s pop sound that I don't generally love. This is especially apparent on the single Touchy. It's a catchy song, but it's a bit too much. um, and I actually watched a documentary on the band after I listened to all these albums, and they talk about that. This was their bid at a more pop audience, and they got really into being teen idols at this point. And you can really tell from listening to this album that that's really the target audience, I think. It's definitely a step down for me from the previous two. I'm not getting nearly as much from the songs. The 80s pop production tends to overwhelm things here, and I don't think that the songwriting is quite as strong. Out of the Blue Comes Green is probably my favorite song so far, but it wouldn't be a standout on either of the two previous albums. You Are the One is pretty catchy. It's the best single out of all the ones that they had as singles here, I think. But I don't think that it's anywhere as near as great as what came from the previous two albums. I don't think it's a bad album, but it's not one I would reach for. And it's one that fits more into what I would expect from a synth pop band in this era. And it's quite disappointing after they surprised me in the first two albums. So it's 3 stars. The next album is East of the Sun, West of the Moon. And you can tell by looking at it, they're going in some different direction. Whether or not it's a positive, it's hard to tell from the cover, but it's definitely a change in the image that they were projecting on that third album. So they open with an Everly Brothers cover, which is very bold. Crying in the Rain is the song that they do, but they do a decent enough job. It's helped by the fact that Morten is a great vocalist, and the outro of the song leans a little bit too hard into the cheesy production of the time, but I don't notice that too much otherwise. It's pretty solid. It sounds a bit like they're taking some inspiration from someone like Chris Isaac, and honestly, I'm not minding it. It's a nice shift after the previous album. It's definitely more of an adult sounding album. The song East of the Song has a nice vocal performance from Harket, and I like the haunting sound with the strings and touches of guitar. You do hear more guitar on this album. They're branching out a lot from the synth pop of the previous album with a more rock-based sound, and I think that is a good move. There's some songs here that are a bit more in the realm of adult contemporary, but not in a way that is too offensive, which is good because like late 80s pop, 90s adult contemporary can be a pretty big Achilles heel for me. Not a fan generally. So if you manage to do it and make it not offensive, that is a good thing. Um, this isn't a great album, but it's a pleasant listen and it's an improvement from the previous two albums in a lot of ways. There's no denying that it's early 90s, but the songs are better than on Stay on These Roads, and there's more variety in sound, and I like the more mature approach. So it's going to be a light 3.5 for me. So then that leads to the last album in the collection, and their last album in this original leg of the band's career. They break up after this and then return and then make a whole bunch more albums. And then, there's a lot of ups and downs over the years. But this is the first wave of their career. So Memorial Beach from 1993. So the first song, Dark of the Night, makes me think of U2. there's definitely a U2 influence around this time, and they mentioned that in the documentary. So when they said that in the documentary, I'm like, oh, okay, well, guess my ears are on point here. It has that anthemic big music feel to it. Morten even sounds a bit like Bono on that song. I don't love that, but I'm not a huge U2 fan necessarily, but I still prefer this to what they were doing in the two albums before. So there's definitely echoes of that U2 influence throughout. And I don't know that this album necessarily sounds of its time. It's more that it sounds like it's drawing inspiration from different music from the 80s than themselves were making at the time, but almost through a 90s lens, if that makes any sense. It's not aggressively trying to be a grunge record, which is good. But I think it draws more from that 80s, like the big music, maybe U2, Echo and the Bunnymen a little bit, that sort of thing. It's the direction makes more sense than doing other 90s sounds, so I'm not going to complain about that. Angel in the Snow is a highlight, some great vocals from Morten, and I say that a lot, but he is a really good vocalist, and that is one thing that really stood out on all these albums. And I like the guitar tone on it. Paul's guitar parts enhance the song. He does a great job. The album aims to have a darker, more mature sounding tone, and I think it's successful. Overall, this is a decent listen. It doesn't feel like an overly defensive bid to be 90s like a lot of 80s artists did at the time. And even if it's a big change in sound from the music they were known for, it's not, it feels more natural than some people's transitions to a new time period did at that time. So that is a positive. It doesn't blow me away like the previous album, but it's a pleasant listen and a good direction for the band. So it's another light 3.5 stars. So that leads to a bit of a mixed bag of a collection. But ultimately, I think because the first two albums are really good, and even the last two albums are good enough, and maybe they could grow on me with time, and even the one in the middle that I don't like as much is not terrible. I think it's worth keeping this collection because even if I were to get rid of it and then go back and buy the first two, I'm just wasting money, really. So, and it doesn't take up that much space. They're nicely compacted into the one case. So, this is going to stay. It is a mixed bag, but ultimately a pleasant mixed bag. And I'm actually happy to know more Aha. I'm glad that I explored them. They're never going to be my favorite band or anything, but it was good to hear that they had more in them than just a few songs that I liked. There was a lot to appreciate. It gave me a lot of respect for them as a band, especially after watching the documentary and learning more about them as well and what they've continued to do over the years. I might check out some of those later albums now as well. It's got me curious. So that's always fun when that happens, when you find something new to like. So, anyway, what do you think about Aha? Do you just know a couple songs? Are you a big fan? No more albums? I'd love to hear more. Anyway, till next time. Bye.